Hey guys, this is Richie Mars. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. Just a little bit of a disclaimer, this episode was recorded before the news of CM Punk's tricep injury that he has suffered at the Royal Rumble match. So we don't go really too much into the details of CM Punk versus Seth Rollins, a prospective match. This is pretty much a overall look on the career of CM Punk and pretty much a character kind of breakdown to see CM Punk the character and CM Punk the man kind of being fused into one. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for checking us out. All right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relive with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your humble, gracious host, Richie Mars. Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast, wherever you're streaming it on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. And the hits keep on rolling after last week's debate of Rock Roman versus Roman Cody. And now I have a very special guest. He heads the channel Suplex Media on TikTok, on YouTube, and he also had a stint in Ohio Valley Wrestling as a writer for their television show. Michael, how you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm doing good, Richie. Thanks for having me on. Doing great. Wrestling's so good right now, man. It's hard not to be doing great. You know what I mean?
It really is. It's one of those times where so many people are perpetually just like legitimately over that it just makes the whole show and the whole vibe just feel very good just watching the show, even if it's like a 3 hour Raw, a 2 hour SmackDown. And if you go to the AEW side, you got a lot of talented guys that you probably wouldn't normally see on wrestling television. Because I remember the days, I'm not sure when you were started watching wrestling. I started in the 2004 Ruthless Aggression era, and which was the low point of diversity watching wrestling on television. All you had were Raw, SmackDown, maybe Velocity, maybe Heat in there. So just give me a little bit of a background on your wrestling fandom and how it take. Did you always were a wrestling fan, or did it evolve over time?
Sure. Ever since I can remember, I've always been a professional wrestling fan. I grew up in the Attitude Era, so I really got into. I was a WCW kid. I'll be honest. The Brood was in the height of my childhood, and the Brood scared the crap out of me as a kid. The idea of the lights going off and being come back covered in blood. Oh my god, I'm talking like things I have to talk to my therapist now still about. I'm like, I just can't. I know he's Adam Copeland. I know he's Adam Copeland, but he's still terrifying to me. But no, I started in the Attitude Era. Always been I was always a WCW fan back in the day. Loved WWF as well. But I think I'm like a lot of people with professional wrestling. If you start when you're young, and I think this is kind of a phenomenon in professional wrestling, and I don't really see that with other art forms. It's not like, for example, you get into wrestling, and you're into your teens, and you get into your teens, and sometimes you kind of peter out. You either drop off or you get really into it. I dropped off. I was out of it for a while. Come to my early 20s, got really back into pro wrestling, and one CM Punk brought me back to professional wrestling. Not just from his work, but like I really connected with him in my mind about a lot of things, how we felt about a lot of things at that time. So long story short, got back into wrestling at the time. I was also doing photography, and that's how I ended up at OVW. Actually,
That's pretty interesting. Now, when you were at OVW, were you
Mhm.
primarily a producer writer for the show?
So I did do production. I did produce backstage segments. I did write backstage segments and storylines, but I was predominantly the television director of
Okay.
OVW. So for those who don't know, in in that kind of a low budget, and I don't want to say low budget, but I want to say like in a smaller production, the director, I'm in charge of what you see on camera. So wherever I'm telling people, I'm telling where our camera operators to go. I'm switching which cameras we're using. Basically, you're a one man show at that point. So I would be switching the cameras. I didn't, the only things I didn't do were lighting and sound, and I'm still very bad at those. So it's kind of funny to be working on a podcast with, they're doing a podcast today. But yeah, it was a great time. I did write some segments, but mostly I was a producer. But when you're in that environment, it's kind of writing by committee because you're talking about things, you're joking about things at certain points, and then you say like, no, that would work. Like we're going to do that. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of I guess in the comedy world, you talk about when you're writing a script, you talk about like punching up a script. I
Mhm.
did a lot of punching up.
Nice, man. And speaking of that, correlates to CM Punk because a lot of the things that you're talking about, CM Punk actually experienced that at OVW. He was very vocal about how OVW he learned a lot from behind the scenes aspect and how that translated to his on screen character. Now, when you were in OVW, what was the reputation of CM Punk, if there were any conversations? Because while you were there,
Sure.
I believe in like the 2010s, you were there. Was a CM Punk like a topic in OVW and how to do things, how not to do things?
Sure. I wouldn't say it was a topic on how not to do things. I was there when CM Punk, for a time frame when he just had left professional wrestling, when he had left WWE. Um, I, for lack of a better, I don't have an opinion whether or not he. There was no real talk whether he was a good or bad person to work with, or I would say, I guess, to just what's the word? Not in, when you act like him, to mimic. You don't want to,
Mhm.
nothing like that. I will say though, CM Punk did have when a few weeks after his. I guess he left WWE, not his firing. I think that, or firing, however you want to say it. He did come to an OVW show actually. So he came right after we actually had. It was the first time we had dirt sheet writing about. Oh, CM Punk's at OVW.
I
CM Punk's
remember
at
hearing those reports. Yeah, I remember he was visiting like it's like, oh, he's visiting Cliff Compton, Ace Steel, all
Bingo.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so Cliff Compton was he was in a program at that time where he was going to win the World Heavyweight Championship. He was so you remember CM Punk's storyline AEW where he's the real world's champion.
Mhm.
Cliff Compton was doing the same thing. He had the old OVW title belt. We had just introduced a new belt. It was beautiful. Cliff had the old belt, and he'd bring it to the ring, and like I can't remember what it was. I don't think he ever lost it. I don't think he ever won it. I think he just found it, and he was like, no, I found it. I'm the champ. Like, so then we had like a match. So he was there that night. Cliff Compton ended up doing a Superfly splash off the top of the OVW cage, and if you've never seen the OVW cage, it's like from ring height, it's 20 feet tall. So it's just insane. Like real quick story. I don't want to monopolize your time here, but that night I came in. I was late. It was a Saturday paper. It was our pay-per-view. I was late. I showed up. CM Punk was in Danny Davis's office. Danny Davis was the owner at the time, and like I usually go in say hi to Danny. I was so late. Didn't even go into Danny's office to see him. And usually at the end of the night I would go to Danny to get my check. But Danny dropped the check off, and I was like, "That's weird. He normally doesn't leave his office," but didn't think much of it. Then somebody was telling me, Punk's back there, right? He's in his office," and I'm like, "No, I had zero idea." He goes, "Yeah, he's just trying to keep it." So I was like, "Okay, fine, whatever." I'm not, inside internally. I was like, "Whoa," because like it was the biggest story at the time. Like CM Punk's not here. What's he doing here? But somebody wrote something where they said like CM Punk was at OVW. We're not really sure what, and I told Danny about it the next week, and he was like, "Well, we just send something out. Hey, he was just visiting Cliff Compton. It's fine. It's not a big deal." But yeah, for a minute, there was a hot little moment where people were like, "CM Punk going to OVW? No, no, no. It's just there to see a buddy." But it's just the wrestling world loves this man so much
Mhm.
that they're willing to almost believe anything just to have him on the screen.
It was a very crazy time in that 2014 era where Punk left WWE and we didn't
Yeah.
hear anything from him prior to the Colt Cabana podcast. It was almost like Punk Watch. You know what I mean? Where it's just
Yeah.
like every single dirt sheet, writer, whatever, are giving us like nuggets and crumbs of what CM Punk is doing when he's not in WWE because we didn't hear formally about his firing until that Colt Cabana interview. So it was a big question mark of, is he coming back? Is he
Yeah.
going somewhere else? What's the update? And neither WWE or CM Punk were talking. Of course, now we know why they weren't talking because of the whole merchandise check thing, and then later the lawsuit because of the podcast kind of dropped. But
Right.
that is all kind of old news right now. But you said something very interesting at the beginning of the podcast that CM Punk was actually the guy who got you back into the fandom. Now, which version of CM Punk was that? Was that the pipe bomb era Punk? Was that the straight edge society Punk? Which one was it?
Straight Edge Society Punk. I'll tell you a fun story real quick. Raw was happening in our local arena, Freedom Hall, here in Louisville, Kentucky. and CM Punk was doing the Straight Edge Society gimmick, and I still remember the angle. It was when he had just lost his match. He shaved his head. He was wearing the mask. And long story short, I used to sell cars, and I was making decent money at 22. So I was like, I took all my friends to wrestling. None of them professional wrestling fans. Like 5 guys like going to wrestling, just enjoy it. I remember CM Punk being there, and I could see like even the guys like who I'd brought who just didn't like wrestling, but they were like, you know what, something to go do, let's go. You could see them connect with like the words that CM Punk was saying. You'd be like, damn, dude, this dude's kind of cool. Like, obviously, like it was he was a heel at the time, and I think the Straight Edge Society was one of his. I know it was the dying days of the Straight Edge Society, but like that gimmick alone was something that really brought me back, because it was something that I wasn't used to. It wasn't, the cookie cutter John Cena, say your prayers, drink your vitamins kind of gimmick, So that's why it was like, oh wow, like this guy likes the same music as I do. I don't have any tattoos or long hair like him. Well, he didn't have long hair at the time; he had a shaved head. But I thought he just looked cool. I thought he was cool, and I think that resonated with a lot of people.
That was definitely my appeal to Punk, because I was in middle school when he debuted in ECW,
Yeah.
and he's like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and that was never presented as the cool thing to do. Like, you see
Yeah.
somebody who preached similar things like a Kurt Angle, and he was booed out of the building, So with
That's
CM
right.
Punk, and he was presented in ECW as the anti-superstar, but that you still
Yeah.
want to root for. And with his outside the box ideas, with the Straight Edge Society, which I thought was an amazing piece of business until their legs got cut out from under them, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
again, he came up during a time where WWE was kind of going through a transitional phase.
Mhm.
If you remember the Ruthless Aggression era, Johnny Ace was in charge of talent relations, and a lot of the superstars looked and sounded the same. I called it the Randy Orton syndrome. If
Yeah.
they could have 12 different Randy Ortons, they would have, the small black trunks, the boots, the knee
Right.
pads, the buzz cut, the tribal tattoos. Like, everybody in the
Yeah.
Ruthless Aggression era looked, sounded the same, and they were just trying to find a diamond in the rough. And if you were slightly different, then according to Punk and just people who were around that backstage area at that time, you almost were ostracized because you were different. And because of, Punk came in long hair, tattoos, uh, having this bravado and confidence about himself that
Mhm.
wasn't really allowed in that system. It's almost like, I believe Bret Hart and Chris Jericho wrote in their books, like Vince McMahon wants to kind of like tear you down when you get to WWE and rebuild
Yeah.
in his own image. And I feel like Punk is the first guy in a while during that period of time, and even to this day, that was 100% pretty much not pushed behind the machine. He was just his own product.
You're right, and it's something that's so inherently him. Like, this was a name, CM Punk. Even we just go with the name, like CM Punk. This was a name that he chose in a backyard federation when he was 11.
Mm.
He was just like, nailed it, got it. Never need to change this. I'm the best. And ever since, I mean, he was his authentic. I mean, honestly, like when you look at it, obviously, like when you get to WWE, things are a little toned down than what you could do in IWA. Like, whatever you're doing in IWA Mid South, ultimately, it kind of was the same thing, but just turn it a little family friendly. Given WWE's product is for, I would say, just a typical younger demographic, which is nothing wrong with that. You got to sell toys,
Mm.
merchandise, understood, but just like present it, but not in a way that's like, oh, kiddish and cartoony, but like, I think that's something, and you touched on it. You really did. You touched on it really well. Everybody felt the same. Everyone felt homogenized. This Randy Orton syndrome, like you were saying. But it's one of these instances, like, you gave us somebody raw and uncut, somebody who was very different than like your cookie cutter, and that's what people wanted. People wanted that diversity. People wanted something different than what they were being, and I think that CM Punk has ultimately been that his entire career.
Mhm. And let's touch upon his beginnings of his career in WWE
Mhm.
with Ohio Valley Wrestling and going
Sure.
into the ECW era. And he really was the perfect fit for this reboot of ECW, because he was counterculture enough where he didn't really fit on a Raw or a SmackDown. And Paul Heyman even CM Punk's own words, took him under his wing and was protected,
Sure.
heavily protected. He had the win streak going. He had everything going on. And even people criticized him on the indies for being the Triple H of the indies. And people were hypothesizing that Punk and Triple H would get along because they see the business in a similar way.
Hmm.
And the funny thing about that is, as we go through the career of Punk, they butted heads. And I want to ask you if it's a case of two guys who are so similar, but they view the business a little bit differently. Because Triple H came through that Killer Kowalski era,
Yeah.
and he came through that 90s era, you know, with the Click and Bret Hart and everything. And then you have Punk coming in, and he came through the indies with Eddie Guerrero, and he
Hmm.
came through with Low Ki, Joe, all these new era talents. And we saw kind of a similar thing when Punk went to AEW. And then you have these new era talents like the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega who
Sure.
see wrestling in their own different way. And I want to get your thoughts on the changing of the guard. And Punk seemed to me, at least at that time, he was one foot in the old school, one foot in the new school.
Yeah.
And that's where the counterculture kind of began with him. And again, when something is new, fresh, and exciting, sometimes people are threatened by that or afraid by that. Do you think that was a case with CM Punk coming up, or his reputation that was being reported at the time?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it, and I think we're going to keep coming back to this analogy that you meant to. He was kind of in between the generations, you know, the ruthless aggression, and then I guess WWE modern era. The lack of a better phrase, CM Punk grew. I believe that CM Punk grew up or learned professional wrestling in a wrestling environment that doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
The old school, the quote unquote, like, you know, guys like Taker saying, "Oh, we got to be manly," or "We got to," you know, all these nerds playing video game stuff. And I think that he grew up in kind of in between, which can make it a tough, it's not an enviable position. I mean, it's enviable in the sense that like you're getting to wrestle the best of the older generation and the best of the newer generation, but like the changes of which WWE or any wrestling promotion that he's gone through is immense. Like wrestling and how it is now is completely different than it was 10 years ago, completely
Mhm.
different than it was 20 years ago. And I think we're seeing a softer side of wrestling. Like, for example, things you can't do anymore, like backstage fights. Like, can't be doing that. Like, you're at work, don't fight people. But growing up in that era where, like, okay, yeah, this is typical, you know, the quote unquote the boys take care of it. You know, it's one of these instances where I think CM Punk is a product of his environment,
Mhm.
and depending on who you are as a person, that can make you feel a certain way about him, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I definitely see that side of it because it's be it's almost like I equate it to like being in your high school. You're a jock, but you also do theater. You know
That's
what I
right.
mean? So it's kind of like if you want to do a high school musical, it's kind of like that.
Yeah,
Or or
I think that that's probably exactly why I flocked to him, because I think I was the only lacrosse slash musical theater person in my all boys high school. So you know how hard it is to stuff yourself in a locker.
I was an amateur
Difficult.
wrestler and I did theater, so I know
Oh, okay,
exactly
we're
what
cut
you're
from the same
saying.
cloth.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
connection there.
Yeah. So it's definitely, you can understand like almost the conflict. And again, with all these reports saying, "Oh yeah, massive heat, big heat," and
Sure.
we've I'm sure we've read the stories about Punk and his backstage heat. I know there was like every other week, like if you read the sheets, and I would as a teenager because I'm like, "Oh, this is legit news." And then of course when you grow up, it's like, not really legit. It's more hearsay. But it's like every other week, it's like Punk has heat. Punk has heat for doing this. Punk has heat for doing an ROH show while he was assigned OVW talent, and the
Yeah.
boys don't like that. And even Punk touched on this with his Colt Cabana podcast,
Mhm.
that it's a very paranoid environment for him being in, and that tough transitionary phase. They were going from ruthless aggression to whatever you want to call it, the PG era, the modern era,
Sure.
and it's almost like being hazed on a sports team,
Yeah.
and then your college or high school goes like, "All right, no more hazing." And then,
Right.
but it's like you have the C on your chest, and you're like, "All right, how do we do things?" Easy. It's to be like, "All right, don't do what what the
Right.
other graduating people did to you. But now it's like, how do you keep it in line? It's like this whole bizarre kind of
Mhm.
mind warp. And then you had the old guard backstage, like you had the John Laurinaitis, you had all those guys, you had Triple H coming into power, and that transition between John Laurinaitis and Triple H at that time. And you can get paranoid about your spot, because I remember there was a story like Del Rio had a concussion, and then he was pulled off all the live events, and it cost him a payday for a world title match.
Yeah.
And when that happens, and then you're, again, another thing, the concussion protocols were still very new at the time too.
Mhm.
So Punk was a part of a lot of firsts, and it almost was like he was a dummy for a bunch of the new WWE rulings that were happening at that time. Like the whole like Twitter era, where it's like he would tweet hockey during Raw, and then he
Right.
would get heat for tweeting about hockey during Raw.
Right.
And it's just very interesting how he came here. But we're going to fast forward to the 2011, the pipe bomb. And a lot of people credit that as the first like boom period that wrestling had since the
Right.
Attitude Era, because it was so
Yeah.
different, it was so real. Now, because it was so real and close to the vest, and CM Punk was the guy to do it, do you think that realism between his character and the person CM Punk almost became like a crutch to him? Because if he's not the guy who's sitting cross-legged on the stage doing pipe bombs, then and he's not peeling behind the curtain, is he really that guy?
Right. I think that the pipe bomb, and I do remember from the podcast, he always said, I think it's weird that people just refer to all promos as pipe bombs now. It's just funny to me, but that's something that's permeated the landscape. You're never going to get rid of it. It's just there forever. Great, you did something, and that's what it is. It's going to be there forever now. But with him, I think that that's I think that that's kind of an issue where CM Punk. I think it's a big issue that CM Punk faces ultimately. It's because I think CM Punk is kind of like It's like the old Al Pacino movie Serpico. Like he's an undercover cop, and you're like, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know what's fake. I don't know what side I'm on anymore. Is he the undercover agent? Is he Phil Brooks, or is he CM Punk? No one. I mean, three people are going to get that reference, and shout out for those three people. But I think it's going to be one of these. I think it's one of these situations that he and his character are so intrinsically linked to one another that you can't separate it. I mean, it's like he went out that night, his biggest night of his career that started the boom period, the pipe bomb like we're talking about. He was airing out real life grievances, allegedly. Obviously, I come from the world of pro wrestling. I have a little cynical bit. Is anything in front of the camera is a work at all times. You have to keep that in mind, because if they didn't want it on TV, they would just send somebody out there or cancel this or stop the segment, But obviously, I think these were real world gripes that he had. I think that those were not disingenuous. I think that those was the way he felt about things. But when you're known as doing the shoot work style promo, and that's what you're known for, that's your life now. It's hard to discern the character. That's why I think a lot of people have an issue. Like, for example, my issue storytelling wise with him, it's just everything he said versus everything he said about WWE. And I know people change. I know places change, and I understand that. But everything he said, I was like, damn, dude, that really sucks. Like, I don't wish that on anybody. But then he goes back, and you're like, well, is that the character that said all that? Or is that Phil Brooks who said all that? And I think that he's always going to be in this nebulous space. And it's hard for me to think of other wrestlers who are in there. Like, obviously, I don't think John Cena is like John Cena outside of, we've seen him on Total Divas and stuff like that. He's different. But I think that a lot of wrestling fans believe that CM Punk is CM Punk at all times. And whether that's to say it was effective heel work from him or effective promo work from him, or if he went out there hard on his sleeve and just told you what he felt. It's going to be this situation that CM Punk blurs the lines. And I don't think it's necessarily blurring the lines so much as like MJF. Like, people blur the lines like, oh, he's just he's bad all the time. Yeah, he's always doing a character, it seems like. But CM Punk, when he says like, I'm sick of this crap. Like, or when he tweets on SmackDown, you know, this poop isn't fun anymore. Or like, I, you know, shit my pants on SmackDown. Like that kind of stuff. You're like, oh yeah, that's just the guy. Like he's him. He's what you see on television. Is I think how a lot of people see CM Punk, and that's what's refreshing. Is because we're so often seeing like this made up character or like, you know, people working an angle like, oh, okay, yeah, Randy Orton's not really setting people on fire outside of the WWE. You know, he's not having matches in haunted houses and he's not scared out by spooky bug graphics on the mat. But CM Punk, I don't know, man. Seems like a real guy. And I think that authenticity is what has propelled him because he's always been authentic, it seems. But who knows what's going on backstage?
A fun nugget. I remember watching a Comic-Con panel of this about the pipe bomb promo.
Yeah.
And this is what Punk claims, that he gave them a fake promo that he was going to say. And then he just said whatever was on his mind, because in his mind, he was like, well, worst comes to worst, I'm leaving in 2 weeks anyway.
Sure.
You know, and because his contract was legitimately up at the time. I think he had to sign like a 2-day extension in order to make the pay-per-view, just so the pay-per-view could happen. And you said something very interesting about the, you know, the character work and the guy being so intertwined. It's almost like Chris Evans when he was very concerned about Captain America being the only thing that he's known for. And now we're at a point where, again, acting is very different from wrestling because wrestlers usually have one character, but sometimes that character will evolve over time. Like look at The Undertaker. How many evolutions did he go through?
Few.
Jericho, same thing. Even Sting, you know, and
That's
now with CM Punk, granted, he went from straight edge society, he went to, you know, the pipe bomb guy, and then he went to the voice of the voiceless. But with CM Punk, it was less of a character change and more of, all right, we're going to accentuate this part of his personality.
Bingo. Exactly.
You know, and I think he's one of the only guys who does, I like, this is going to be a weird comparison, but it almost feels like the Ultimate Warrior in a way, of where you don't see the Warrior as Jim Hellwig as much. They just kind of morphed into one person over time. Right. And with CM Punk and the guy Phil Brooks who's portraying CM Punk are just so intertwined and so linked together that people can't distinguish between the two. And that's a pro and a con. A con is that we don't know if he's telling the truth in character or is he telling the truth in real life. But at the same time, I think that's helped his appeal and his rabidest fan base, because the name CM Punk is the most polarizing name in wrestling today. And I don't think there's going to be another person for quite a while that's going to be as polarizing as CM Punk himself. And I think that has a large part to do with it. I mean, when he returned on Rampage for AEW, you saw people legitimately like crying.
Yeah.
You know, and that just shows how much emotion this guy enacts against not only fans, but his haters as well. And have you seen anybody who invokes that much emotion as Punk does to the current crop of wrestling fans?
You know, I think we're in an interesting period where we have had a lot of people go out on injury and come back, right? So Daniel Bryan, Edge, or Bryan Danielson or Adam Copeland, depending on what your touch points are with them. I think that those type of guys elicit a response, but it was almost like we understand why you left or why you had to stop because you were hurt, and we all understand that. But I think that what makes the connection and what makes that, like the example, like you said, fans literally tearing up, is that CM Punk, I think, represented a lot of us in a way that we've all had something in our lives, whether it's a job, a relationship, or a friendship, that you've done everything. Like you've tried so hard, you worked hurt, like CM Punk worked hurt, did the crappy jobs, you know, as he said, wrestled the hurty guy, Ryback. You know, he did everything he possibly could. And no matter what he did, it just wasn't enough. And ultimately, that relationship became toxic and he had to leave it. And I think we've all had something like that. I think ultimately that's an emotional connection that we're like, you know, I did everything right. I tried my best. I put myself in compromising positions for this person. all to be treated like garbage, all to be treated like an afterthought at the end of the day because, quote unquote, The Rock came back. It, was one of his issues, which seems to be a running theme in pro wrestling, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. But I think that's what it is. I think it's that human aspect, because I think the best stories in pro wrestling are best stories being told in pro wrestling are ones that the audience can connect to. Because if you can't connect to it, great, it's a good story, but like, oh, great, now you're making me think about like something that happened in my life, and now I'm really emotional. And when CM Punk came back to professional wrestling, because there's no doubt in my mind that he loved pro wrestling, and it's like I said about having that relationship or that job. It's something that you absolutely loved. You couldn't imagine not having in your life, and then one day it's just all gone. Mm-hmm. And then you come back to it, or or things work out, you grow, things change. And I think it was kind of a cathartic experience for a lot of people there. I think that's what those tears, that fan, I don't know his name. I saw an interview with him, but like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I want to say like, it's seeing somebody come back that you've spent so much time, effort, energy, supporting from afar as well. Coming back to see, like, there's one thing that I love more than anything else in the world, and that's when somebody who's passionate about something is doing something they're passionate about. I don't care if you're passionate about underwater basket weaving, professional wrestling, or painting landscapes. If you're in your element and you're hyped to be doing it, I'm in on it. I love it. Good stuff. I think that's what it was for me, is to see CM Punk come back and see that smile on his face and just be like, yeah, man, I missed it. I love wrestling,
Yeah, because we've heard a bunch since Punk left. It's like, oh, he's going to come back this date. He's going to come back this date. And then he says he's never coming back. And even though he said never say never, but it's most likely he wasn't going to come back. He did the UFC thing. That happened for a bit, and then didn't hear anything. He was doing other stuff with Marvel. He was doing movie stuff. Yeah. And then when he finally came back to AEW, the response was overwhelming. And then kind of a fast forward in his AEW run, his program with Eddie Kingston, which was a work shoot in a sense, where you have two of these guys who are very believable in what they say. And something that was very different, I would say, between Punk in WWE to Punk in AEW was actually also the reporting of Punk, the dirt sheet reporting, because 7 years is a long time to not be involved in the mix. And CM Punk, who was known as the voice of the voiceless, when he went to AEW, it was almost like he was the establishment, where he wasn't as in tune with what the AEW audience necessarily wanted, and nor should that be a requirement for the AEW audience. But for the AEW audience, things were very specifically tailored towards them. It was very internet based, and whatever was reported on the internet, they would take it and run with it to certain degree. So what do you contribute as, I don't want to say the downfall of the popularity in CM Punk, because he leaned into those mixed reactions, with the John Cena stuff, the shoulder tackle, the whirly bird special, and the 5-knuckle shuffle. Where did you see the crowd almost souring on CM Punk?
The thing is, I guess maybe I had the rose tinted glasses on at the time, but for my time in AEW, when I was watching him in AEW, I thought that, like, okay, like, he seems to be coming back. Like, granted, his in-ring work wasn't as strong. And it shouldn't be. It absolutely shouldn't be. You took 7 years off, and you're going, and it's just a completely different style. They're so much faster in AEW. Like, think of it more as like Dragon Gate, as the speed, the amount of times people move back and forth. But I do think that there was a bit. I do remember something. I do remember that it was at the time AEW before was relying on the quote unquote homegrown stars, or the elite establishment, as you will, like those guys who helped start the company, those guys who were there from day one. And CM Punk did kind of, Tony was collecting ex-WWE stars. I mean, a lot of people, they worked other places before, so they're not just WWE folks, but he was collecting a lot of people who were getting let go at the time. And I think it kind of like, I think a lot of people at that time were just like, he's got a lot of guys. Like, he's got too many guys. Well, now he's got another guy. Keith Lee's here. Andrade Alito's here. Malachi Black's here. Oh, okay, well, I loved NXT Black and Gold. That's okay. And you're like, I just remember that news coming through that CM Punk's coming, and you're like, that's crazy. I don't believe that, but it ended up happening. But if you were to tell me that CM Punk was going to be coming back to wrestling, and like 8 months later, people would be soured on him, I would have been blown away. But then again, I, I think one of the things that's, and I don't want to, belabor this point too much. I am in the soured on CM Punk camp, and I think that comes from not his stuff on screen, but his stuff off screen. And I think we'll touch on that, but I think
Mhm.
that it's about the, you talk about the reporting, the way things are reported. There's a lot of things we're not going to see on camera, but I guess it's something, as I've gotten older, I've noticed that with the reporting, of course you take it with a grain of salt, you read what you read, but it just seemed like the man CM Punk was in front of the camera was not the man that CM Punk was behind the camera. And that kind of shook faith, I believe. If I had to armchair psychologist this, would say it shook the faith in people, because for so long we thought what we saw on camera was the genuine artifact. We thought that that's what CM Punk is, through in and throughout. But like, then you start hearing these work shoot promos, and it leads to like, what, the pipe bomb. The pipe bomb's gonna haunt CM Punk forever, not just because of the name that he doesn't like it, but because you did a work shoot promo. You're the work shoot promo guy. Guess what now? Everyone's gonna do the work shoot promo on you. And guess what? We found out some stuff that we didn't like. Eddie Kingston kind of talking about how scummy CM Punk is, so you start seeing this and you're just like, oh, are these stories real? Hangman Adam Page coming out and protecting AEW from you. And you're like, that's a weird thing to say.
Mhm.
And then you're like, oh, damn. Okay. Maybe that was real.
Yeah, and that's where the interest in AEW, at least for me, kind of almost waned a little bit. Like, I was interested in seeing what was going on. I was just like, okay, it's their attempt at a work shoot. I'm like, I don't think, because I've seen, like, being the elite and all that, and they would always do the wink, wink, nudge, nudge when
Sure.
it came to like their stories and their
Right.
storylines. And when CM Punk went on that tirade with the I think they call it Brawl Out, and he was just at this press conference and he was just airing his grievances. He called on Nick Hausman, who I guess fancies himself a journalist, but
Yeah. The
but
less said about that, the better at this point.
yeah,
Jesus.
but Punk basically, he admitted, it's like, oh, you blew up my spot. So he was planning on going on this rant one way or another, because the rumor was he tried to get Colt Cabana kiboshed, and even
Yeah.
Tony Khan, he didn't squash it right then and there, as he probably should have,
Sure.
because since Tony didn't put no one was right in this situation,
Right.
and Tony not squashing the rumor as it should have been, Punk for going on this tirade and calling out the people who are technically EVPs and his coworkers, because we
Right.
later found out that Punk had a office role as well.
Sure.
And then just the Bucks and Kenny in general, like when they came back from that suspension, just poking fun at the situation, which you're allowed to do, but it's not gonna
Right.
keep it out of the fans' minds, because the AEW audience will eat that stuff up. Anything drama related, and unfortunately, this drama overshadowed the great in-ring work that was happening in AEW at that time. The
Right.
stories in general, and didn't do anything to uh, have that goodwill of AEW. So, what I want to ask you, was this the sour point of the CM Punk, or was this kind of like the exclamation on the continuing sourness that you've been having with Punk?
So I want to touch. I want to, before I answer that, I want to say, remember Seth Rollins' interview, the infamous, "Oh, we don't want you back, cancerous Phil." And I'm not saying CM Punk's a cancer. I'm not. And cancer, and no one should be. No one ultimately should be like. That shouldn't be a simile. We shouldn't say people are like cancer. Cancer is completely a terrible thing, ruins people's lives, destroys families. Most people in the wrestling business aren't that.
Mhm.
But what it kind of akins to is the spread, right? It's kind of a chicken and the egg situation. Was CM Punk bringing the quote unquote bad tidings of AEW, or was it just, sophomore slump for AEW? They had been doing things for a few years. Now they have a big name in the house. Maybe that was the cause, but I don't know if CM Punk was the cause of the issue. I know that he was, I don't want to say a symptom. I do want to say that he did not make things better. And I think that that's something that's important because, he fancied himself, apparently he fancied himself a locker room leader in WWE, coming in saying like, as the locker room leader, which is mind blowing to me. That CM Punk used to do that. But it's funny because I think this was what soured. This is where I started to sour on Punk a little bit, because when you watch him in the press conference for Brawl Out, at the beginning I was thinking like, oh, okay, it's just another work shoot promo. He's burying the Elite, burying Hangman. We'll get the other matches. That's fine. I think that's what he's doing. I think he's working. But then you hear like, oh no, like he meant it, and you're like, uh-oh. But that was the thing that's when I figured out that he meant it, it was a problem for me, because at the beginning he said of it, and he said basically he was mad that Hangman went out and quote unquote went into business for himself. And he was talking about how you need to be a professional, and these guys couldn't manage a target, and yada yada yada. Meanwhile, you're on this tirade shooting on everybody with a pulse in AEW, but you're mad that somebody went into business for themselves. Meanwhile, you are literally going into business for yourselves against everyone. And if it's one thing that I don't like in life, it's hypocrisy. Like, if whatever you're going to be, just be it. Like, don't speak out of the side of your mouth, but like, it almost became like a victim mentality, I feel like, unfortunately. And that mileage may vary depending on what your relationship with CM Punk is. But it was just a crack in the facade that let me see that. I was like, oh man, like, and that's me. I worked myself into a shoot. I thought that this was the genuine article. I thought CM Punk was, who he said he was. And it was one of these instances. I'm like, oh damn, he might kind of be a bit of a goober. Like, he's not self-aware to realize, oh damn, I'm doing the exact same thing that I'm mad about, but I'm just like doing it to somebody else. And so it's like one of these situations that's like, you need to like take a minute. And that's what I thought. I thought the whole Brawl Out situation, I was like, look, there was one fight in my whole 5 years at OVW. It's not, I know people say, oh, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. You're at work. There's no reason while you're at work you should have to worry about someone beating you up. And if you're in a situation like that, you do need to report that to somebody, because that's not okay. I don't care if you're a construction worker. I don't care if you're a medical coder. You just shouldn't have to worry about getting your ass kicked at work. That's not a safe environment. And it touches back on what we talked about earlier, which in between those two worlds, like the old school and the new school, I think that CM Punk has some old school tendencies. He thought, some street justice would take care of it. But like, it's a little different when you got 2 UFC fights under your belt, when you've practiced fighting. Meanwhile, I don't think the Young Bucks could throw anything besides a working punch. I mean, if you imagine getting a fight with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, they're just throwing working punches. Meanwhile, CM Punk's like, I got this spin kick for you. It's coming.
I do like the one reporting that they said that the Bucks literally like super kicked the door down to Punk's locker room, and I'm just like, someone who was taking liberties with that story.
I
But
love that. It's a metal door. Did you see Goldberg headbutted those on a weekly basis? I think I would rather take a Young Bucks super kick than a Goldberg headbutt, and he didn't tear a single door down in WCW.
like, I remember seeing a Goldberg headbutt like in his 2003 era, and like the metal door like dented,
Sure.
and I'm just like, jeez,
He's great.
this guy.
But
Just
yeah,
like
the idea that the Young Bucks are going to kick open the door for an ex-UFC fighter and be like, we're going to beat him up. I'm like, I don't, like, say what you will about the Young Bucks, but like, they can't be crybaby, scaredy pants guys and kick down the door at the same time. It's either one or the other. Like, pick your side, internet. Are the Young Bucks tough guys who think they could beat up CM Punk? Or do they kind of go when, because that's the thing. CM Punk said, what did he say? He said, if you got a problem with that, come to my locker room. Young Bucks go to locker room. You got a problem with them? I'm going to kick your ass now. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work out.
I'm not going to defend Punk, throwing hands and just starting to like beat the Young Bucks up or anything like that. But I will say one of the main reasons he signed with AEW was the quietness the locker room had concerning Brody Lee and his condition and the secretive nature of it. But then you started going into these reports of Punk possibly ousting Cabana from AEW and the Bucks trying to get Cabana back. And before in AEW, the reporting was more anti Cody Rhodes, if you remember a little
Sure.
bit, where it was anti Cody, anti Brandy. But a lot of people in AEW, like a Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Jade Cargill, all said glowing things about the Cody CM Punk camp. Now,
Mhm.
it's almost like whoever was leaking the information, and of course, Bucks are going to be uh, suspects number 1 and 2, 1A, 1B,
Sure.
when it comes to that because of the closeness connection to Dave Meltzer. I mean, they have a finisher named after the guy, for cripe's sake, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost like whoever decided to leak out this information was either trying to, and this is me putting on my tinfoil hat, was either trying to hinder AEW or hinder Punk or
Sure.
Cody or anything like that. Now, do you think the dirt sheets, and this is like a comparison between the dirt sheets, like when they were rooting for Punk going up the ladder to
Yeah.
trying to tear Punk down, do you think the dirt sheets had a little bit too much control in AEW and their image at that time and still to this day?
So here's the thing and it's and not to get on a soapbox about reporting in general. If
Mhm.
it the old, I used to work, and it's a long time ago, but I used to do like local news for like our school at University of Louisville, where I went to college. Used to do the paper stuff, and one of the things that our college advisors always tell us, like you got to write the stories that people want to read, right? People don't want to read stories like everything's good at AEW and Matt and Nick Jackson gave out puppies. Like no one's going to read that. But like the drama, that the stuff like that, that's what sells. And I think in dirt sheets, and this is a little conjecture with a little stories that I can't really discuss because other people haven't discussed them and it's their stories to tell, but
Mhm.
you trade in the dirt sheets like a commodity. Hey, I'm going to tell you about this hot piece of gossip, Dave Meltzer in this case. In turn, when a story about me that comes out that's not so pleasant, I might want you to take that story and just put it down in the pile. You know, it's people talk about working in professional wrestling. You work everything. You even work the journalist because ultimately, and this happens in NFL. This happens with all the sports. A lot of sports leagues. It's that if I have a piece of information that is valuable to you, now maybe you have something valuable to me. It's a tit for tat. But the fact that we put so much, I think the fact that we put so much time, effort, and energy to these dirt sheets, and I don't mean dirt sheets as a negative. I just mean in the way
Sure.
that just the name. It ultimately, these are the only people covering wrestling. Like you
Mhm.
want to say dirt, we can't believe any of the dirt sheet writers. Well, babe, USA Today and the Washington Post ain't writing about it. So I
Yeah.
don't know what you want me to do. It's either you get it from these guys who know people or you don't get it at all. So it's one of these situations that we put a lot of time, effort, and energy into this. And I don't quite understand why.
Mhm.
I think it's because of the secret nature of wrestling in general that we're all like, as fans, even me, like, I don't know everything about pro wrestling. I don't know a lot of these guys who are in these stories, but we want to know because we
Mhm.
have connected with them and we want to know if they're what's going on. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really affect the, I guess, stuff on television so much, but it does affect our perception. It's the same thing with people posting these empty seat pictures of AEW and things like that. And it's one of these situations that's like, well, AEW is going downhill because they don't fill up the hard cam side. It's like, well, you wouldn't know that if you watch the television program because they don't shoot it that way. You wouldn't know that it's empty. The only reason we know it's empty is because nerds like us on the internet take pictures and want to argue about stuff. It's the same reason if we didn't care about arguing about little things about like that, the dirt sheets wouldn't do it. The fact is, we're willing to pay $8.50 a month or whatever they're charging nowadays
Mhm.
to just get some information that is coming from one side. Like that's the thing about the dirt sheets. This thing about modern journalism. Somebody's got a story, they're going to tell it, and then you're like, okay, well, what about that other person's perspective? They're not going to talk to you on camera about it. Like CM Punk and obviously they have the NDAs. We will never hear. You'll never hear the story of what happened between these two people. Even if you put the Bucks and CM Punk in back-to-back interviews, the stories are going to be so drastically different. So putting all these eggs in one basket and making decisions on what's going on ultimately is kind of silly because we don't know who's saying this. And Dave Meltzer's not going to come out and say, Chris Jericho told me this. CM Punk told me this. They're just not. I mean, Dave Meltzer did slip up in one of his or one of his podcasts, and he said he had been reached out to by CM Punk about a story to tell him something. But
Mhm.
you know, it, I guess it's one of these instances when I think about dirt sheets. If someone was to write something about you, and I guess it ultimately depends on how you feel, listener, is how you are as a person. Do you read something that's not real about you and you just kind of laugh it off and just like whatever, dude, that's fine. Like
Mhm.
leave what you want. I like personally, I don't care. You want to write something about me and say like I'm X, Y, and Z. I know who I am. I know what I'm about. That's fine. Other people, they say like, oh, I got to correct the record on literally everything about me. Like I can't have one piece of false information. So you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know whose people's motivations or what their stories are coming from or what they're gaining. So take everything with a grain of salt. But the fact that we let our opinions about companies be swayed because of like extracurricular stories. I mean, of course, there's some things that get leaked out that are like unforgivable, but like ultimately, most of the stuff that's going to happen is just like it's not that big of a deal. Like, why are we putting so much stock in it?
Right. I definitely agree with putting so much stock in the wrestling journalism portion of it, and especially because a lot of these journalists, they put their own opinion on it without properly diagnosing it as an op-ed piece,
Right.
and they sometimes will mix opinion with rumor, and then that opinion gets a rumor. Like I remember reading something a while ago. Dave Meltzer is like, yeah, the main event for WrestleMania Night 2 is going to be Rock versus Roman or Roman versus Cody, or it's going to be a triple threat match. I'm like,
Sure.
so you put all the conceivable
Conceivable
options,
options. Right.
so it's like technically it's like, okay, so you're not wrong. And I could understand why Punk would be upset. It's like he's trying to be the, for lack of a better term, the figurehead of the company, as he should be, being the biggest star, biggest margin, biggest pay-per-view buy for AEW, the biggest merchandise sales for AEW. So I
Mhm.
understand his reason to be upset. It's just the reaction wasn't like,
Yeah.
shouldn't have gone physical. And his reaction to the reportings is almost like, if you read Bret Hart's book, Bret
Mhm.
Hart goes on like tangents about Dave Meltzer several times in his autobiography.
Sure.
And it got to a point where I was reading it, I'm just like, why are you letting this guy affect you this much?
Right.
It's like, why are you giving this guy so much power when you are legitimately, at that time, Brett was one of the top performers in the world.
You're Bret friggin' Hart, man.
Yeah.
And Dave Meltzer's sitting in his messy office doing curls. He's got massive arms, but like he's not he's like okay. I don't mean to diminish Dave Meltzer and his reporting because
Mhm.
like him, Bill Apter, wrestling journalism is the way it is for better or for worse
Mhm.
because of them.
Mhm.
But honestly, it's like one guy. It's one guy.
Mhm.
It's one guy in his opinion. People get bent out of shape about his ratings. It's like you don't care about anybody else's. Like wrestling is so subjective,
Mhm.
but like your journalism shouldn't be subjective, you
Right.
know. But that's what it is. Like you mentioned earlier, no one's saying if it's not a bad piece, if it's not a bad piece, or if it's not. It's one of these situations in wrestling that like because I just don't understand why we treat it like it's a different medium than everything else. It's no different than a television show. Why are we treating it like that? We're just we want the gossip because of I think of wrestling's secretive nature in general.
Yeah. Yeah, especially it's kind of like when someone would do like a Talking Dead or like an After Hours
Yeah.
show, and it's like, oh, these are the scenes that you didn't. But wrestling's the only medium where it's just kind of like, here's how the sausage is made, kind of. You know
Right.
what
We
I
don't
mean?
want you to know,
Yeah, we
but
don't
yeah.
want you to know, but here's a little like tidbit on like what's going on a little bit. And another thing that was very interesting, that reporters actually had a source for this because there were photos out there, was when Punk, after this brawl out situation, was backstage at a WWE Raw before he came back. Now it was reported that he talked to The Miz, he talked to Triple H before he was escorted out. And some people will say this was a 4D chess move in showing AEW. It's like, oh, hey, I could get along with people I didn't get along with in the past, but also, hey, there's also this option here, so you better do what I say. So people took that and ran with it with many different things. And of course, CM Punk had less than savory things to say about The Miz, and him apologizing to it. There seems to be a running theme of Punk will overreact to a certain degree and
Right.
then apologize. We've seen it with The Miz, we've seen it with Hangman Page. And of course, the infamous quote, the apology has to be just as loud as the disrespect.
Yeah.
Now, again, you said you soured on Punk pretty much at this point. Is it just kind of a sort of, hey, this is like a pattern behavior of overreactions and then the apology not necessarily being as loud as the disrespect?
Yeah. So I think it is. So like, I guess it kind of, for lack of a better way, the way CM Punk acted was a way that I've acted in my life previously, where I didn't see a hill that wasn't like, oh, I'm ready to die on that thing. I will battle you until like I am right and you are wrong, and you will know how wrong you are because I'm going to tell you how wrong you are. And that's a real toxic way to live your life. Like, you want to do that, I don't recommend it, but you do you, but you're going to ultimately burn more bridges than you create. You're not going to leave professional wrestling a better place. You're ultimately going to sour your legacy because these stories are going to come out. And I do think it was an overreaction. Like, I don't think CM Punk is dumb by any stretch of the imagination. I think that he's an incredibly intelligent person, and I think he knows what he was doing there. You know, it's I know you could play it off. Oh, he just want to go see his friends. Yeah, but he didn't go see those friends for 7 years. You want to tell me WWE didn't really run in Chicago? And people say, well, you don't know if he was backstage. Somebody reported to the dirt sheets. You would have told me somebody wouldn't have given an arm and a leg for that information. No, CM Punk was backstage, but he did it publicly. And when you do things like that publicly, there are going to be public repercussions. People are going to change the way they think. The news came out. There was some news recently that said like CM Punk was allegedly trying to go back to WWE before signing with AEW as well. And when you put those together with him showing up during his time off, it's like, buddy, like what's your end goal? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you just trying to like wave it in everyone's face and say, look what I can do? Tony Khan's not going to do anything. I understand Tony's putting a rock in a hard place there. Like, ultimately, I do think he made the right call for the sake of AEW, but your top money guy, and this is, I guess this is a little tangent on Tony. It's all these people say Tony's weak. Tony's weak. Yeah, he did show weakness. He should have said something in that press conference and just been like, you know what, Punk, I appreciate it. Let's focus on tonight, your crowning achievement, your victory. You can put him over however you want. But it takes guts to have your new startup company, the biggest draw in professional wrestling, someone that the people have wanted for years to come in, and then you just say, sorry, man, you're out. You're done. And I think there was a lot of disrespect. I think that was disrespectful to AEW, to the work that they were doing, because that's gonna make so much more questions than it answers, unfortunately.
Yeah, because
that puts Tony in a weird spot.
Yeah, and we've seen Tony just kind of bend over backwards for Punk, at least
Right.
from the outside looking in. And we're not talking about like dirt sheet reporters. We're just looking at our own eyes. I mean, you saw the Collision show being specifically made for CM Punk. You've seen, and I did like Collision when Punk was the figurehead of it, because it felt like a totally different show than Dynamite, which has been criticized for being too fast paced. With this, it felt like a nice medium between, like old WCW, old WWE stuff, and Collision had that feel about it, and I believe Punk was a big part of that.
Yeah.
But then again, you hear and see these reportings of like the meme banned from Collision.
That's right.
So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, instead of having a sit down conversation saying, hey, I know we don't all like each other, but I'm the boss here. We have to figure out how to work together. That's on the Punk's side, it's on the Bucks side, and if you can't get those combustible elements to at least like kind of simmer a little bit and being like, look, I don't like you, you don't like me. Let's just try to have the best showing possible.
Right.
This was all about egos. It's all about Punk's ego, Buck's ego, and
Mhm.
whatever faction of sides you land on. And Tony, who is the boss, couldn't control any of them.
Sure.
And he blew a massive opportunity with arguably his biggest money making star. And when we fast forward to All In, and then we get Real Glass Go Cry Me a River, and then of course CM Punk, and this is from the third party. I, I I'm blanking on his name. He was with Swerve's entrance. He did an interview a little bit
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. The guy who does this song. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he was talking, I believe, to Sam Roberts on his show, and
Mhm.
saying, and quote, the big Hawaiian looking dude was just trying to keep the peace between everything, and there was like punches thrown, like blood was everywhere, like, and you could actually see on the All In show there was like blood on Samoa Joe's towel,
Oh wow. Yeah, I have
and
to go back and watch that. That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and I remember hearing this report of Punk and Jack Perry getting in a fight backstage. I wasn't watching the show at the time. I
Yeah.
was just scrolling on Twitter. I was just like, got in a fight. I'm like, why is Punk on the pre-show? And then it finally clicked. I'm like, oh, that's what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah,
And
it's crazy, and shout out to Samoa Joe because if there's
mm,
someone who could squash the riffraff almost anywhere, like I'm not starting stuff if Samoa Joe's in the room. Like I
mhm,
don't care if my mortal enemy's in the room and I'm like I got one shot, I better make it count. Like no, Samoa Joe's gonna put me in a cohina clutch and I'm gonna wake up watching a Roddy Piper match in heaven. It's just not going to be good for me. So shout out
mhm,
Joe doing that. But yeah, it's so funny because when you watch the match and like Jack Perry says it's real glass, cry me a river, and we're all like, what the hell does that mean?
mhm,
That's weird. And then you find out, you're like, oh, those might be the most interesting words you've ever said, Jungle Boy, because what it ultimately means. Um, who would have like? Here's the thing about ultimately with that. Like, why was that the thing that sent CM Punk over the edge? Like CM Punk, if you've listened to him like any of his podcasts, yes, he has a respect for some of the old timers, but you know what? There were a lot of people who he also was just like, no, man, we're doing our own thing. We're blazing our own trails. We're doing our own move sets. Like he bucked the system in a way coming up that was different. That's what made him stand out. And when somebody tries to buck the system or do something different, and ultimately Jack Perry, the whole real glass thing, it's always safety glass.
mhm,
It's glass, but it just breaks in a way that's not going to create giant shards. If people aren't smartened up with that, it's like your windshield, it breaks in a spider pattern, or like most of your plate glass windows, they'll break into small little pebbles as opposed to like chunks of glass. So
mhm,
like it's never real glass. No one's gone through like a real plane of non-safety glass in a long time because you'll die. Like you'll just get cut up. But it's just funny to me that CM Punk was seeing somebody who's willing to take risk in their career for a higher payout later or like a moment. And he wasn't okay with that, which there's no doubt in my mind. Like when CM Punk, for example, like CM Punk broke his neck or his back. He broke his neck or his back on a move and he was out. And you would think, man, shouldn't do that move again. But his first match back, he went and did the flip again, didn't land on his neck. He was fine. But this is back way long ago. It's like, as a younger performer, you have to do things that are going to stand out. I'm not saying you got to go dive through 100 light tubes or throw yourself in a barbed wire thicket like it. But when you look at the spot, that was just in this case, a suplex into
Humvee.
a windscreen
Yeah.
wasn't that bad.
Mhm.
Like it's not. No one got hurt. No one died.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you to put your conspiracy hat on. I already have
Sure.
my baseball hat on right now. Uh, do you think that was just kind of an excuse for Punk to leave AEW, or do you
I
think that's his actual reaction?
you know it's hard. So like, let's go full conspiracy, full Alex Jones mode here. I believe that the aliens are taking over. No, I believe that CM Punk. I think that it just got under his skin. I don't know if he had the wherewithal to be like, hey, I'm gonna fight Luke Perry's son over something inconsequential, and that'll get me out of here. Because ultimately, like, I didn't think Tony would fire CM Punk ever. I think CM Punk could have pooped on Tony's desk and he'd be like, okay, thank you. Please sell shirts. Goodbye. Like, but I don't think it was premeditated. I think it was one of these things where like he got shown up and he was like, oh, I don't know how to handle these big feelings. I'm going to punch. It's if it's premeditated, it's so much worse. I'm not saying that acting in the heat of the moment is a good thing, but having a premeditated assault of a coworker so you can get your contract canceled is psychotic behavior. Like that's insane. To do literally anything else. That's like, I'm going to go burn the building down so I don't have to work at Burger King anymore. No, man, talk to your manager. Be like, yo, I'm not having fun. I hate it here. If that's the case, then do that. But like, that's why I think like, originally when all this stuff started coming out, well, CM Punk was trying to get signed before. He was, talking with other people, blah, blah, blah. I think it was an overreaction again. I think that CM Punk, like in the documentary, he mentions that he has a tattoo of a heart about where a short sleeve shirt would go. And he talks about having his heart on his sleeve. And I believe that that's the way he is. I think he's a very emotional person. I think a lot of artists are. But when your artistry is punching or fighting or fake fighting or, premeditated fighting, I think that sometimes that's something he might have gone to as a base. Like, was what Jungle Boy said worth being punched over? No. Should Jungle Boy have said that stuff and tried to show up Punk on TV? No. But ultimately, if Punk didn't fight Jungle Boy, that line, it's real glass, cry me a river, would have gone down the river. No one would have, oh, there goes my camera, would have never, ever been brought up again. No one would have ever, it wouldn't have become a meme. It just would have been like an offhanded line. It would have been like, okay, whatever, Jungle Boy, you do your thing. But because of that, it's become something bigger. So I don't think it was warranted. I don't think it was premeditated. I just think maybe he got a little hot under the collar.
And of course, that striking of the Jungle Boy led to Punk being fired, as we said. And then, shockingly, only 3 months removed, he goes back to WWE. Triple H signs him to WWE. Now, I was on record on the Ruthless Talk podcast for their Survivor Series show that we have a better
Ruthless
chance.
Talk.
Yeah.
Shout out.
You can follow them on Spotify and Apple Music as well. And just, I said there was a better chance of Colt Cabana appearing on the Survivor Series. Of course, that didn't happen. And I had to eat crow a little bit, but that's all right because then we got CM Punk back. Now, run has been almost like a fever dream to me. Because there was so much history, from the lawsuits to the promos to everything that Punk said before, even selling shirts. Hell has frozen over, right? The little like CM Punk logo on there too. So it's a monetarily positive thing for WWE when they're already on fire. Sure. And this is being recorded prior to the Royal Rumble. So if Punk wins the Rumble, congratulations. All you had to do.
Sorry you got thrown out by The Rock there, Punk. I'm calling it.
I think there's a pretty legit chance that The Rock shows up at the Rumble too. So, like, it's going to be one of those things.
The Rock has the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever. During the pipe bomb, Punk called out, I'm so mad that Dwayne is in the final or is in the main event of WrestleMania and I'm not. So I would love if Rock the Dwayne Johnson threw CM Punk over the top rope and he looks at him and he goes, "Cry me a river." I'd be like, okay, I'm in on The Rock now. He can just come out and just make fun of people's balls like he does, and then like he'll do his catchphrase and then he'll leave. But like if he does that, I'll be like, I'm in. I'm more Rock, please. I will gladly take just Rock if you're listening, and we know you are. We know that you're listening. You are one of the subscribers on my channel and Richie's channel here. we know you're a big fan. But just go ahead and throw that out there. That's a gift from me to you. Cry me a river. The internet fans will love it. And I know you're trying to bring back your goodwill after Black Adam didn't pan out. This will get you back. I promise, babe.
Shout out to The Rock. Shout out to Black Adam. I heard it was. I heard it was okay. I didn't see it. I didn't see it either. so maybe we're the problem.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
But
with if he shows up, I think CM Punk is where he's at right now. It has felt like a fever dream because I think we all expected something to come out of Punk that first night. Like it was palpable. It was almost like, you know, the first day of school. Like you couldn't sleep the day before. You're like, CM Punk is going to be on Raw tomorrow, and he's going to like come out, and everyone was like, he's going to just like shoot on AEW because that's what he did to WWE. Like he just talked about like, you know, he talked about he couldn't get healthy at this place and blah blah blah, and he just kind of came out and cut the baby face like, I'm just happy to be here promo, and it felt so weird. It didn't feel authentic Punk because that's not what we're used to. You know, I don't think CM Punk's known as a man with a lot of gratitude for the WWE, but he did come out and kind of just say, it feels like home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that just stuck with me. It just like, not in a good way. And I understand people change, places change. That happens. And that's well, and I'm glad that WWE has changed, but to call that place your home after what you said they did to you, after that Dynamite promo where you just said like, hey, I could never get healthy there. It was just not a good environment. And then to come back and you're just like, hey, I'm home. I'm glad I'm here. And you're like, what do you believe? Like for that, I think that's kind of the whole run of CM Punk for me is like, he was so intrinsically linked with the character. We're like, that's just the real guy. And it's just like, I don't know what to believe anymore.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there, where his first return promo was almost like a test run in a lot of ways of
Right.
This is what Punk is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna kind of see where his head's at. We're gonna see if like he could do this promo that's, for lack of a better term, cookie cutter.
Sure.
Have him cut it. And then we saw on the SmackDown, it was either the week after or the next SmackDown, he cut a promo that was more intuitive to the CM Punk character.
Yeah.
And now he's had promos with McIntyre. He had the promo with Cody Rhodes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of going back to the form of what CM Punk is. And it's almost like trying to catch lightning in a bottle again, where you're never going to catch the same lightning twice.
No.
And very rarely can you get that again. And it's ironic that Punk, who won their main event WrestleMania, had to leave and then come back, the very same thing that he was criticizing other people doing, like Rock, like Brock, and having lack of people to work with after the fact, after he loses to all these superstars. And now he's in that same position. Now, is he going to win the world title or not? Remains to be seen.
Right.
But it really does confirm, for at least for me, that CM Punk has one of the most confusing but interesting legacies of professional wrestling. So what do you think CM Punk's legacy is? Because it's like he has many different chapters. Like he was a trailblazer, being the first major indie star to succeed in WWE, then transition into the guy to walk out of WWE and successfully defeat them in court, to essentially his essence, like carrying over, creating another company with that same do-it-yourself mentality, to being in that company, to almost destroying that company's reputation, into going back to the company that he was tearing down in the first place based on that persona. So what do you think CM Punk's legacy is as of now that we're recording?
I think it's convoluted. And I think the way you just put it so succinctly, it's just, yes, he does this, but then this happens. It does this and does this, and then this happens. It's really hard to tell. I think it's kind of nebulous where he is. I think that it's up in the air right now when I think about it. CM Punk has the opportunity to go one of two ways. He can either go down as the guy who great professional wrestler. This comeback is like, I don't want to say it's anyone's last time, his last opportunity here. But if this run doesn't go well, I think he's done irreparable damage to his legacy. Him leaving, you got to think, for me, it's about where CM Punk was when he left. His name was synonymous with, we will yell his name when you're doing things we do not like. CM Punk was right about this. He was right about you all being crap. He's right about your bad booking decision. He's right about this. And we will yell his name for the roofs because that's what it means to us. Now, it's like, well, we just kind of chanted CM Punk, and he's back to where, like, I understand things in WWE have changed, but when he came back, Vince hadn't been gone that long. And I'm not saying Hunter didn't revolutionize everything and make it the best it could possibly be. I know he's still working on it. It seems like he's still working on that. And it seems WWE is getting to be a better place. And I love that for everyone who works there and everyone involved. But the people that you have problems with are still there. And I think that that's something that a lot of people, and obviously we don't know what his relationship with Hunter is, or Triple H is like. I don't know Hunter, so I'll just call him Triple H. I don't know. It's one of these situations that's like, we don't really know what's going on, but from the outsider perspective, I don't trust him as much in his words. And that hurts a lot, because at a point, CM Punk was the most authentic wrestler. I'm not saying that he's inauthentic now, or he's lying, or he's doing this. He could feel 100%. He could feel that he's at home. He could be water under the bridge with everything going on. But it's one of these things, I guess, with me, it's like, when you get treated so bad by somebody, like, if you go back to them, you kind of might be the problem. Like that, you're kind of hurting yourself. So his legacy right now, though, is up in the air. If he goes through this and he goes into WWE and he gets into another backstage incident, or he's just like a problem, I think CM Punk is known his rest of the time as like, the dude's a headache. Mm-hmm. Like, he never grew up. He's childish. He's immature, because ultimately children use their fists to solve problems. And I know that we're in the professional wrestling business. I understand the irony of that. But when the camera's not rolling and you're punching people, no, not good. Not good. So I think that he has an opportunity to show growth here. And I think he's always going to be kind of a, like you said, a polarizing figure, because wrestling right now is very polarized. You see it, because you see people say, like, oh, CM Punk did nothing wrong. It's all the Bucks. It's all this. And I would say that the fault lies all the way around. Mm-hmm. I think everyone I'll put it out there, I think the Bucks probably handled it incorrectly, because if someone's that hot and tells you, settle it in my dressing room if you want to, and you show up, you're dumb. Don't do that. Like, let it take a day, cool off. Let's come back and talk about this. And then CM Punk ultimately getting violent with people, not a good thing, not something you do. I understand, like, certain circumstances, but ultimately we're talking about wrestling. Like, people get stuck in this wrestling bubble. And it's something that kind of irks me. And it's like, okay, if we heard, who are we talking about? If we heard that Chris Evans punched out Robert Downey Jr. on the set of like Infinity War, you'd be like, Jesus Christ, like, that's not okay. Like,
that would be the news cycle for the next 2 weeks.
Right, it would, and that's what it is. In wrestling, like, we get a story and we're like, oh, gimme, I can like sink my teeth into. But CM Punk has so many fans that are like hardcore, like, CM Punk till I die. He can do no wrong, and he's earned that. Don't get me wrong, he's definitely earned those accolades. But your heroes can do things that are wrong. You do things that are wrong. I do things that are wrong. It's okay. It doesn't make us who we are. But to sit here and say, like, CM Punk could never do anything wrong. Yeah, he could. Mm-hmm. Just, you're a fan. You love him. But I think ultimately, if he is the master of his own destiny. And that's awesome for him, because he can choose what he wants to do. And what he chooses right now is ultimately, I think, is the measure of the man. Because getting fired from AEW, you had somebody like Tony. Think of it as like a relationship, right? I know it's an employment, but just most of us have not been professional wrestlers. Most of us have been in relationships. You're in a relationship where this guy is just kind of bad to you, but you're like, man, I will give you like whatever you want. Like, I'll do this. You want your own show? You don't like those guys? You don't like the Elite? I won't make you work with them. That's fine. You want this? You got a new show on Saturday. You guys don't even have to be in the same buildings anymore. How about that? Does that work? Great. What if I let you pick all your friends? Like, you could just pick your buddies to come over. That way, no one is on the roster that you don't like. And then I give you veto power to just kick Christopher Daniels out if you don't like something Christopher Daniels is saying. You can just kick out the head of talent relations. Like, I'll give you that power. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. I'll give you as much television time as you want. Who do you want to wrestle? Great. You can wrestle the world champion. You can be world champion. And he does all that stuff. And then at the end of the day, Tony's like, get the hell out. And I think that that's a wake-up call, because you don't have somebody who's willing to bend over backwards, like you said, give him everything. And then they say, you know what? You're not worth it. You're not worth the headache. And I think that that might have been a wake-up call for him. And I'm hoping, and I think that that's my wishful thinking, I'm hoping that he understands, like, damn, dude, someone who was literally in love with me. Like, I think Tony Khan was literally in love with CM Punk, not in like a romantic way, but like, I love you as a wrestler. We all have those guys we're huge fans of. And ultimately, you have to fire one of your heroes. And when you have to do that, hopefully your hero steps back and realizes, he goes, maybe I'm being kind of a bit of a jerk.
Yeah, it's a very big, like, I call it the martyr effect.
Yeah.
You know, where everything has to, like you said, like, you have to die on every hill.
Right.
And that's what fans, the charisma that Punk has is very attractive to wrestling fans and people. And the opposite is true. Again, like we've said during this podcast, there's a collection of fans who love CM Punk, and then there's a collection of fans who are just, man, Punk shouldn't be nowhere near wrestling. He's toxic, he's cancer, he's this. It's those two extreme ends of the spectrum that I don't think we're ever going to see again, at least not for this time period. And with Punk in general, I think his legacy is going to be told into different stories and chapters,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like an anthology series. You have the Trailblazer, then you have the guy who rebelled against the biggest company in the world in the system and still succeeded, the guy who walked out of said company and said he wanted to do things my way, like Frank Sinatra. And then he took a break, came back to a place where his spirit was still kind of living on, and ultimately almost crushed and destroyed that company from the inside, the exact opposite of what was happening when he went into the WWE.
Right.
So he's just a very intriguing figure at this time. So, final question. If there was one word you could do to describe CM Punk, what would it be?
I don't mean for the dead air there. I understand. That's a great question. I think that he's real, and I think that that's ultimately what's going to happen. I think that this instance of CM Punk right now, where he's happy to be here, I think that eventually he's going to. I think it, like you said, it's kind of a trial run, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, look, Punk, go out there, make sure you don't make a mockery of us and say dumb things, but like, we'll give you some more lead. And I think he's going to get there. I don't think he's going to have, I'm going to put it out here so you can clip it in your audio for all of our listeners out there, and you can tell me how wrong I am when he does this. But I don't think he's going to have another issue. I don't think he's going to have, some people need a more rigorous structure. Some people can, it's like work, like it's like working at home, right? Some people can work at home. Some people have to be in the office, or they'll just play on their phone and be on TikTok all day. Follow us on TikTok if you're not following already. But I think that CM Punk is real. I think right now it's kind of a weird hiccup for him. I think he's authentic to himself, but I don't know. I guess that's how I would describe him. But his legacy, I know I'm struggling for words here, because it's really it's like the old chicken on top of a roof right now. Like, that egg can go either way, and I'm interested to see it. But like, one of those ways, my quote unquote wrestling hero of my 20s comes back, and like, I'm like justified and I'm happy. And the other side, I realize that maybe someone who I looked up to wasn't all they were cracked up to be. And it hurts, but that's the way it is. I mean, that happens. That definitely happens. But I hope, and I don't pray. I don't want to waste time. I don't want to waste time and jam up other people's prayers over pro wrestling. But I just hope he gets. I think his head's on right, but I think he's real. I think ultimately at the end of the day, what you see in the ring, what you see out there, I think that's Punk. I think Phil. I know you say Phil Brooks is his name, but I think that's Punk. I think that's Phil. I think that's him.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. Michael from Suplex Media, thank you for joining me here on the CM Punk episode. It was very cool to kind of like dissect the roots
Yeah.
of CM Punk and just kind of see how fandom changes and how you could be young, like you said, in your 20s or your teens, and you're seeing this guy that you admire so much for the creativity and how real it's going on. And then as you're growing older, and then you kind of see the jadedness in
Sure.
said performer, and then you kind of see this other side of him that you weren't anticipating on seeing, and then it kind of just everything kind of breaks down from there. And it's a really cool, in a tragic sense, to
Right.
see things kind of break down until you finally see this performer, and you can never see him the same way as you did when you first watched him. And I think that's with professional wrestling with a lot of
Yeah.
people. You know, a lot of people had that effect with Hulk Hogan. A lot of people had
Right.
that with Stone Cold. A lot of people had that with Rock, John
Mhm.
Cena. And now with Punk. And it seems like there are very few wrestlers that come out the other side as 100%
Yeah.
that superhero version of them. But with Punk, you still have all of those people who will hardcore defend Punk, but you also have this other side of fans that will just explode with he's toxic, he's this, he's that. And it's almost like two sides are going to be continuously at war for the rest of Punk's time in professional wrestling. And that's the most intriguing thing about Punk, is that I feel like he's the only superstar with the effect of this vitriol, but this elativeness as well.
Yeah. I
So,
think whichever way he goes, people are going to tune in.
mhm.
People talk about draws in pro wrestling, and ultimately, CM Punk still a draw. Like didn't matter how you feel about him. The fact that CM Punk is on, probably in the next couple of minutes here on Raw, people are watching.
Yeah, 1000%. All right, Michael, is there anything you want to plug? Anything in the
Yeah.
future? I do recommend your Young Bucks video for everybody. It's great
Oh,
breakdown
thank
of the
you.
Young Bucks. Great video. Is there anything else you would like to plug today, sir?
Yeah, let me just plug the YouTube as well as the TikTok. Hey, youtube.com. We're at suplex_media, suplex media. If you just Google it, look for the square, the circle, and the 6 stars, because we're only bringing you 6-star content this year in 2024. We got a little bit of everything going on in there. I got a game show called You Mark, where you know how much people love correcting you in pro wrestling. Well, we made it a game show where the corrections are the answers. I look forward to having Richie on here soon to that. But our main goal as a channel is I want to make pro wrestling a little bit more accessible. There's a lot of us wrestling nerds out there who can be a little abrasive to new fans, because guess what? Pro wrestling's been going on since we were all around, and it'll be here long after us. But people need touch points. Richie put over the Young Bucks video. I want to make sure people understand, or not understand, because it's not my job to help to make people understand. It's me to give you content, to give you ideas of, hey, what's going on here. I want people to understand where for example, I got a new piece coming out this week about Samoa Joe. What brought Joe to the dance? People who aren't familiar, if your only touch points were Samoa Joe in NXT and AEW currently, he's 10 years in TNA before that. He was rookie of the year in Southern California. Him and John Cena had matches together in UPW back in the day. So it's just to give you a little different stories. I'm not really giving you my opinions or like my hot takes over there. I just want to tell a little history, give people who are new to the sport a touch point to say, okay, now I know a little bit about Samoa Joe when I watch him on television. Also in 2024, We have a documentary series coming out. First episode will be out. What is today? This will be out next Friday. It'll probably be out first week of February. So about 2 weeks from now, a week after this. We were embedded with a local independent in rural Kentucky, which is where I'm in Louisville, but we went into a rural independent called New South Wrestling, and we did a little investigation work of what's going on these rural independents, what's really going on, and we got a good story out of it. So we're going to be doing it's the show is called Subject to Change, where we'll be looking at different aspects of the professional wrestling business in angles and ideas and thoughts in ways that you're not typically seeing. So we got a new episode. We got our first episode coming out. We just shot that the other day. And that's all in the can. So get ready. It's going to be a big year. New episodes of our game show, which I discussed earlier, You Mark, coming out. Those will be starting in February as well. But please give us a chance, or even if you just want to watch one video, go ahead and check out that Young Bucks video. I'm pretty proud of it. But give us a look over at Suplex Media. We're also on YouTube. If you want hot takes, if you want a little bit of information in regards to the world of pro wrestling from a perspective of somebody who's written, directed, and produced pro wrestling, follow me on TikTok. I throw my ideas on there, or throw my takes on there. But depending on what you're looking for hot takes, TikTok will see you there. And if you're looking for a little bit of more information on the professional wrestling world and what happened before they all made it onto big television screens, go ahead and give us a look over at youtube.com, suplex_media.
That sounds good to me, Michael. And plus, I believe your channel is one of the few channels that evenly bridges the gap between the casual fan and the diehard fan, which I believe should be the goal in any professional wrestling fandom, or just fandom in general when it comes to casual and diehard fans, that you have content that appeals to everybody on
Yeah.
that spectrum. And that's exactly what your channel does. Again, thank you so much for coming. Everyone, please go follow Michael on the YouTube, on the TikTok, on every social media that they are available on suplex_media. And again, you could follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on the Twitter, the Instagram, and the TikTok at Retold Richie Mars. This has been a fantastic edition, a fantastic episode. TTFN, ta-ta for now. Until next time.